My wife Mary and I have been in a relationship since 2011. We got married in 2014 and have 2 kids, a 4-year-old boy and a 1-year-old girl. Mary has a best friend named Izzy, and they've been best friends since elementary school. Izzy was the maid of honor at our wedding and is the godmother of our son. Anyway, something happened between Izzy's brother and one of Mary's coworkers. Apparently, according to my wife, Izzy's brother was a jerk because he couldn't handle the coworker being a strong, independent woman. I don't know the full story from Izzy's perspective, but their friendship is currently at its lowest point. I don't understand why they got so involved in this relationship, and to be honest, I don't really care. This morning, Izzy texted me saying she needed to talk to me about something related to Mary's past. She told me I'm a great guy and I don't deserve any of this. I immediately called her and demanded to know what she was talking about. Izzy then proceeded to tell me everything. It turns out that my older brother James had a closeness with my wife before we even met, and it went on for years. I had no clue that they even knew each other. Izzy mentioned that James was the one who got away from my wife, but he never wanted a committed relationship. He only wanted to have a physical relationship with Mary and move on. I asked Izzy how long this went on, and she said it was between 2005 and 2010. It's important to note that Mary and I met at one of my cousin's Christmas parties in December 2010. Izzy told me that Mary started dating me because I resembled James, and I was like a consolation prize. Apparently, after I asked for Mary's number, she called James and informed him that she was going to date me, asking him to keep our history a secret. My brother agreed because he felt bad for stringing Mary along all those years, and he had also started dating someone else at that time. You know, looking back at previous family reunions, I do recall my wife and James always having conversations and laughing together. I remember James being supportive of our relationship and even telling me, "Never let this one go." Izzy apologized for revealing all of this now, especially after we have 2 kids. She hopes I can forgive her and still considers me a good friend. I thanked her for being honest and assured her that I also consider her a friend. We agreed to talk later. Right now, I can't talk to anyone about this. My therapist is on vacation, and my other siblings and parents adore Mary, so they would just tell me to suck it up. Most of my friends are also friends with Mary, but deep down, I'm extremely angry. If I had known that she was my brother's ex, I would have never even pursued a relationship with her, let alone marry her and have 2 kids. I don't know what to do. Has the past decade of my life been based on false pretenses? I don't think she's having an affair with my brother. He's a pilot and lives 6 hours away, plus he loves his wife, as far as I know. Besides, he's my half-brother biologically, and we never had a close relationship. Still, I always respected him. He was strong, smart, and he always protected me. What should I do? These past few days have been quite interesting. Let me tell you. First, I had a conversation with my brother about the truth of his and my wife's past. He didn't reveal much after seeing how angry I was during our Zoom call. He simply mentioned that he did me a favor by preventing my ex, who apparently everyone in the family hated, news to me, from worming her way back into our lives. I was confused and asked for more details, but he didn't provide anything substantial. He denied having any interest in my wife after we started dating and suggested I talk to her instead. He abruptly ended the Zoom call before I could ask anyone else. Shortly after that, my wife texted me saying she's on her way to talk to me. Apparently, James called her and informed her about what happened. Sure enough, she arrived not long after, and she was in tears. I couldn't tell if it was genuine or if she was faking it. Instead of apologizing, her first question was, "Who told you?" I told her that it wasn't important, but she insisted that if it was Izzy, I shouldn't believe anything she said because Izzy now hates her. I asked her why Izzy hates her, and that's when she shared what had happened between them. So here's the story. Izzy's brother offended one of Mary's co-workers while they were sleeping, and Mary encouraged the co-worker to report the incident to the police. As a result, Izzy's brother's ex used this report as leverage to gain sole custody of their children. Now Izzy is at risk of not seeing her nieces and nephews until they turn 18. A couple of days ago, Izzy and her siblings went to confront the co-worker at my wife's workplace, but they were escorted out by security. Now, keep in mind that I wasn't aware of 90% of this story because my wife has been staying with her sister since April, and she didn't share all of this with me over the phone. When I asked her why she didn't tell me, she said she was afraid I would take Izzy's side because I like Izzy's family, which I do, and she thought I would get mad at her. I reassured her that if the offense against the coworker was real, I wouldn't have reacted that way. After we sat down and she made some coffee, she started sharing her side of the story. It turns out that after we first met, when she found out I was James's brother, she called James to inquire about me. My wife explained that it was James's suggestion to keep their past relationship hidden because he believed I wouldn't have dated her if I knew about their history, which is true. She also revealed that when she had doubts about our relationship after our fourth or fifth date, she called James and asked him how she could break up with me without hurting my feelings. It was James who convinced her to give me another chance. I was surprised to learn that she never told me about her doubts at the beginning of our relationship. I asked her how James convinced her, and Mary shared that James shared some silly childhood stories about me and convinced her that she wouldn't find a decent guy like me in today's day and age. So, after all these revelations, I asked my wife if I was just a second choice to James and if she settled for me. She admitted that she initially started dating me because I resembled James, but she stayed with me because of who I am as a person. Then, I questioned why she never shared any of this with me over the past decade. She responded by saying that none of it mattered, and wouldn't have mattered if it wasn't for Izzy stirring things up. Hearing this made me extremely upset, and she shamelessly admitted that she would have kept hiding the truth. However, when she started sobbing, I managed to calm myself down and not let my anger get the best of me. She looked vulnerable, and her repeated apologies only made me feel worse. After she composed herself a bit, I told her that her words didn't really ease my concerns, and I still felt like our relationship was always overshadowed by James. This made her cry again, and she pleaded for my forgiveness, expressing her love for our family and for me. I asked her for some space, and she went back to her sister's house where the kids were staying. As she was leaving, she kept telling me she loves me and that she would return later. She tried to kiss me goodbye, but I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. I felt guilty because it was the first time I had ever denied her a kiss. Anyway, over the next 2 days, every single person from my wife's friends and family contacted me to hurl insults at me. Even her sister, who had just given birth, told me she always knew I didn't deserve her sister and that she would find a top-notch divorce lawyer. Her so-called new best friend, who used to be second best, also called me an idiot for believing Izzy, warning me that she would ruin my life. Despite my attempts to clarify that I wasn't involved with Izzy, she didn't listen and even wished that I would contract HIV from Izzy. Ridiculous, right? I should note that Izzy never bothered to call me again after her initial revelations. Then James had the audacity to call me once more, telling me not to be an idiot. Well, that conversation quickly turned into a shouting match because I can't stand that piece of crap with his seemingly perfect life. As for my wife, she never bothered to call me. Instead, she sent me a text saying that she would return on Monday morning with the kids, and we could continue our conversation then. I expressed my displeasure about how I had been insulted by everyone she knows, and she justified herself by saying that she had to share something because she couldn't stop crying. I didn't respond further. That's it. I've heard my wife's side of the story, and honestly, it's even worse than when I first heard it from Izzy. These past 2 days, I've been drowning my sorrows with my buddies, drinking and trying to distract myself. They even suggested getting back at Izzy, but I won't stoop to that level. I just feel like a lifeless shell of a person. I always wanted to be a pilot like James, but I couldn't pass the physical exam. I hate my accounting job. And to top it all off, I'm living in a cramped apartment with a wife who deep down would have preferred to be with my successful brother in the first place. What's even more frustrating is that it feels like my wife didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. All she did was say sorry and cry. I deserved more than that. Update. Let's just say I decided to file for divorce. I made an effort to forgive both my wife and my brother. I kept telling myself that it all happened before I even entered the picture. We even went to marriage counseling, and I sought individual counseling as well, but nothing seemed to work. I just can't move past the deception and lies that were thrown at me. Funny enough, Mary actually admitted that she saw this day coming. She didn't think it would come through her former best friend Izzy, but she acknowledged that she built our marriage on a lie, pretending that she hadn't slept with her husband's brother for years before she met me. I really gave it my all, guys. I truly did. We have a 4-year-old daughter and a delicate 1-year-old son who had to spend a lot of time in the NICU after he was born. Will they blame me in 20 years for not being able to overcome this issue? Will they end up struggling with obsession or something because of a broken home? It's a heavy weight to bear. Anyway, my wife moved back to her parents' house, and even her parents called me, begging for my forgiveness. They knew about my brother's involvement all along. I reassured them that it's not their fault, but rather their daughter's, and I wish them well. We haven't established a custody arrangement yet, but I'm taking the kids whenever I get the chance. I also asked my brother to give me some space for the next few years while I try to recover. He said he would comply with my request, but not without adding that I'll end up alone and regret this decision until my last breath or something like that. That's the situation, folks. Oh, by the way, I did sleep with Izzy 2 days ago. It's all good, though, because I found out that my ex-wife has also started sleeping with someone else. Anyways, the hookup with Izzy was really, really bad. I think she even faked her finish. She wants to go on a vacation with me next month, but I don't think that's a good idea. Second story. So here's the deal. I, 32 am, have already started the process of getting a divorce from my soon-to-be ex-wife, 27F. I'm currently in Kentucky while she's in Florida with our 14-month-old child. This is a pretty intense and dramatic situation, which is why I'm using a throwaway account because my soon-to-be ex-wife knows my regular Reddit account. Normally, I don't share personal stuff online, but right now I'm feeling incredibly alone and you could really use some support. Let me give you a little background story. When I was 18, I was in a messed up relationship with a woman, and despite using birth control, we ended up having a child together. She cheated on me multiple times, but the worst part was when she cheated on me with my best friend. Let's call him James. It absolutely crushed me. I cut off all contact with my friend for years, but eventually I managed to pick myself up and reach out to him. He expressed deep remorse and apologized profusely, and against my better judgment, I forgave him. At that time, I felt like this woman had isolated me from all my close friends, and I didn't want to lose my oldest childhood friend because of her actions. Unfortunately, this becomes relevant in the story later on. All right? Let me catch you up to the present. So I now have custody of my 13-year-old son, and I was happily married for a while. My wife comes from a super wealthy family, while I had a tough upbringing with financial struggles like not always having enough food. My parents got divorced, and I lived with my mom, who was on disability. By the time I turned 30, I had a good job running a land surveying business with my licensed surveyor dad. My wife was pursuing her bachelor's degree, and I was working full-time while also working towards my associate's degree. Things seemed okay on the surface, but looking back now, I'm realizing there were so many warning signs that I overlooked because I was in love. One thing that stood out was my wife's constant struggles with school. It seemed odd to me that she was having such a hard time while I was doing well in my studies and working full-time. She would get upset with me for getting good grades, so to avoid conflict, I started lying to her and telling her I got average grades, C's, when, in reality, I was maintaining a nearly perfect GPA. I tried my best to support and encourage her in her schoolwork, but it eventually got to the point where I ended up doing her homework for her because she claimed she was too overwhelmed to do it herself. When the COVID pandemic hit, my job took a hit and my income decreased. We were still managing financially, but it was tighter. Despite her being on birth control, she ended up getting pregnant and we had a child together. It was during her pregnancy that things started going downhill. About 2 months before our daughter was born, her dad passed away due to COVID, which caused a lot of grief and sadness. Our daughter was born in March 2021, and I made a decision to take time off work to be as involved as possible in her life. I really wanted to establish a strong bond with my daughter, So I took several months off, and when I eventually returned to work, it was only part-time. My wife was dealing with postpartum depression, and I had read online that the best thing to do in such situations is to offer as much help as possible. So that's exactly what I did. I regularly took care of my wife, making her breakfast in bed, and I devoted myself to taking great care of our daughter. My wife has always been terrible at doing household chores. She dislikes cleaning, doing dishes, and cooking dinner, so we used to hire people to clean our house. However, since my income decreased, I had to take on these responsibilities myself. Fortunately, I actually enjoyed doing these tasks, so I happily took care of them. But over time, the weight of these responsibilities started to burden me. I decided to seek therapy for help, and initially, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. However, that diagnosis was later changed to ADHD, and I'm now receiving the appropriate treatment for it. During this period, my wife started exhibiting some concerning behaviors. She accused me of having an affair with my therapist, which was completely unfounded. Whenever I went to work, she would demand that I come home immediately to assist with our baby. She would also confide in me about feeling frustrated with our baby and having to resist the urge to shake her, which deeply alarmed me. Her anger was escalating, and while she had always had anger issues, things were getting worse. There were multiple instances where she did something extremely hurtful in front of my family and our son. I found myself having to apologize on her behalf and try to repair the damaged relationships, but going into detail about those incidents would only make my already long story even longer. So, things started to unravel in July 2021. I woke up at 4 a.m. to find my wife screaming at our 4-month-old baby, rocking her a bit too forcefully in an attempt to make her sleep because she was crying. It startled me, and I immediately sat up and told my wife to give me our baby so I could take care of her. My wife seemed ashamed, like she had been caught in the act. I explained to her that she was scaring our child and she needed to hand her over to me. Reluctantly, she did, and then went back to sleep. I took care of the baby and put her back to bed. But I couldn't shake off what had just happened. It was hard for me to accept. I went to work that day, but the incident weighed heavily on my mind. When I returned home, my wife wanted to confront me and defend her actions, but I told her I couldn't talk to her at that moment. All I wanted was to take a shower and take my dog to the vet appointment, and we could discuss it later. However, she kept following me around, refusing to leave me alone. Eventually, I went outside, and she continued to yell at me, unwilling to give me the space I needed. I confronted her about her anger issues and told her that she seemed to only care about herself, urging her to behave better. In response, she took a step forward and slapped me hard. I didn't retaliate, I just slumped down and said, "Look at what you've done now." Feeling a mix of shock and sadness, I went upstairs and sat on the toilet, shedding some tears. Surprisingly, she followed me upstairs, but instead of apologizing, she began to explain how she became defensive and how my words triggered her anger because they reminded her of her own offensive parents. I couldn't believe she wasn't offering an apology, but was trying to justify her actions instead. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided not to continue with my plans to take a shower and left to take our dog to the vet. While I was at the vet, she reached out to some of my family members and asked them to take her to a mental hospital for treatment. By the time I returned, she had already left for the hospital, and she was texting me, expressing how sorry she was. Eventually, she received a diagnosis of postpartum issues, and although it took time, I did my best to forgive her and be understanding. After she returned from the hospital, things seemed somewhat normal for a while. However, after about 3 days, she asked me why I appeared withdrawn. I replied that it was difficult for me to cope with the fact that she had hit me. In response, she brought up a claim from years ago, saying that I had thrown a hairbrush at her and that she had forgiven me for it. I honestly don't recall ever doing that, but suddenly it was being used against me, and I felt compelled to apologize for something I didn't even remember doing. Now I realized that it never actually happened. A few months later, her stepmother in Florida was diagnosed with lung cancer and offered to buy us a $400K house there. This was exciting because I live in Kentucky and it meant we would have to move. Plus, my old friend James now lived in Florida, and I was looking forward to reconnecting with him. We went ahead and bought the house, but complications arose when it came to negotiating the move with my 13-year-old son's mother. I completely understood her perspective. I started to reconsider the move because I didn't want to give up being close to my son. However, my wife insisted that it should be our son's decision on where he wants to live, even if he chose to live with his mom instead of us. She believed I should give him that option. At first, I was hesitant about giving my son the choice, but my wife told me that her mom and therapist agreed with her. Eventually, I gave in and presented the option to my son, either come with us to Florida or stay with his mom. He expressed that he didn't want us to move, but if we did, he preferred to stay with his mother here. Things became awkward after he made his choice. My wife became extremely upset and started yelling at him from outside the bathroom while he was using it. He went upstairs and locked himself in his bedroom. I felt awful, and then my wife started blaming me, saying that she never told me to give him that option. She insisted that she never said anything like that, and I eventually gave up trying to argue with her. So things calmed down for a while. My wife barely managed to earn her bachelor's degree, but she got into trouble for plagiarism. After that, I started writing papers for her and helping her with tests. She graduated with a GPA of around 2.4. Additionally, she began taking Prozac, claiming it would help with her anger issues. To be honest, I genuinely believed that she was getting better. We started making a lot of plans because things were slowing down here. My father decided to pursue his land surveying license in Florida, and amazingly, he got a good job right away. His first day was on May 16th. We all went down to Florida in late March, but my father's son and I came back up so that my son could finish the school year. Meanwhile, my wife stayed in Florida with our 1-year-old daughter. She wanted to visit her stepmother, who had cancer and is elderly, as we're not sure how much time she has left. Once again, everything appeared to be fine between us. I genuinely believed that my wife and I were deeply in love. I was even willing to make the sacrifice of letting my son stay with his mother so she could be closer to her family. In early May, my dad and I made the decision to quit our jobs here and prepare for the move. My dad planned to join us temporarily until he sold his houses and could build a new one on the vacant lot next to our Florida home. He made the long drive down on Friday, May 6th, while I stayed behind. But then, on Saturday, May 7th, my world shattered when my wife called to confess that she no longer loved me and hadn't for a while. I was devastated. I cried a lot, but something about how my wife seemed to enjoy my pain felt unsettling. We had been together for about 6 years, married for 3, and it was incredibly hard to accept. That evening, I mustered the courage to ask if she still wanted me to come to Florida, and she responded with a nonchalant, "Sure." I then brought up our daughter and asked what would happen if things didn't work out between us. She assured me that she wouldn't keep our daughter from me, but she intended to stay in Florida with her. I was completely crushed. I reached out to my friends and family for support, and fortunately, they were there for me. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me, and she had even texted a friend about it, who then shared the screenshots with me. As soon as I found out, I immediately contacted a lawyer to understand my legal options and started the divorce process. Things took a disturbing turn on Tuesday, May 10th, when my wife allowed our daughter to get access to her psychiatric medication. We had to contact poison control and rinse her mouth out to ensure her safety. However, despite this incident, my wife asked my dad, who was now in Florida, to watch our daughter so she could have a me day. She left around 9 a.m. and didn't return until midnight. Little did I know that during her time away, she went to see my friend James, who lived 2 hours away, and their emotional affair turned into a physical one. The next day, my dad decided to move out. It wasn't until I confronted my wife about the affair that she finally admitted to it. I had suspicions because James never responded to me when I informed him about the divorce proceedings. Before my wife confessed, she kept insisting that she just wanted me to choose her and claimed that this wasn't a sudden decision. I explained to her that I was already willing to prioritize her over my son, but now I can't do that anymore because things changed abruptly for me. It turns out she was just trying to alleviate her own guilt. So currently, I am in a tough spot. I lost my job, I don't have custody of my child, and my father isn't around to support me. She has our car in Florida, and I'm not the homeowner like I had anticipated. On top of it all, I had to pay for my lawyer's fees using a credit card. However, there's a silver lining in all of this. Thanks to the child custody laws, the state responsible for determining the custody of our 14-month-old daughter is Kentucky, not Florida. This means she'll have to go to court and convince the authorities to allow her to move with our daughter down to Florida. In the meantime, my lawyer is pretty confident that we can obtain sole custody. My soon-to-be ex-wife wants to reconcile, but I'm not communicating with her at all. She keeps insisting that she never wanted a divorce, and that I took things too far. She even reached out to my dad and told him that if we work things out, I have to remove my name from the Florida home's deed, so she would have full ownership. She claims that her mother will always despise me because she thinks I'm a horrible person, but she wishes I would come to Florida so we can resolve things. However, she refuses to come back to Kentucky unless I drop the divorce proceedings. Honestly, I have no intention of reconciling with her. The toughest part about all of this is that I can't bring myself to cry. I really want to let it all out, but whenever tears come, I feel guilty for allowing myself to end up in this situation. If I hadn't reached out to James, maybe my wife wouldn't have cheated on me like she did. What's even worse is that I know she did it to hurt me. She was well aware of the history between me and James and deliberately chose to have an affair with the one person who could deal such a devastating blow to my self-confidence.